Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Everyday Muslim. If you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe and share it with your friends and family. If you like to support it, go to patreon.com/emuslimpodcast. We also have an audio-only version of this podcast for if you're on the go. You can check it out at anchor.fm/everydaymuslim. All the links will be in the video description. Lastly, thank you so much for all of your support.
Assalamu alaikum, Imam John. How are you doing today?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Blessed, alhamdulillah. Hopefully you're doing well as well.
Yes, alhamdulillah. So, we're going to start off by talking about where we left off on the Treaty of Hudaibiyah. So, when and how was the treaty broken, and what was its significance to the Muslim population?
Yeah, so the Prophet ﷺ, at the meeting of the Hudaybiyah, he was willing to just, as long as Muslims could just maintain their autonomy in Medina and they would have the opportunity to make Umrah or Hajj, whatever it took, he was willing to meet that. And then, as long as there can be peace, that's a great thing. So he made some concessions, and it didn't take but, a couple of years, even less than that, according to some historians, so you have, part of the thing was about alliances. So in Arabia, they have tribal anarchy, which basically is a random set of legal principle. So based on the tribe's current views or alliances with so-and-so, this becomes now understood engagement. But there is no consequences. So they wrote consequences into Hudaybiyah. And so basically, Banu Khuza'a became an ally to the Muslims, and Banu Bakr became an ally to the Quraish. So what happened was Banu Bakr murdered some guys from Khuza'a and attacked them and robbed them, and then the knowledge came to the Prophet ﷺ. Prophet ﷺ commanded the Quraysh to immediately make blood money for that and to try to absolve that. And the Quraysh were saying, no, we don't have to do that. This isn't our problem. We don't even recognize the treaty anymore, according to some of the narrations. So at that point now, the Prophet ﷺ is consulting with his companions, and now over those last, because now that what the Prophet was asking was that people from anywhere in Arabia now have a comfort zone with Muslims in that there is a peace treaty with Quraysh. So before, there are many tribes that are allied with Quraysh simply because Quraysh controls Mecca. This is the sacred, epicenter of Arabia. So now you have many tribes that the Prophet ﷺ and the companions are visiting them, and they're visiting Medina and meeting the Prophet and learning about Islam. So there's a huge influx of conversion that happened during Hudaybiyah's treaty. So now the Prophet ﷺ and his companions resolved, it's time. We have to go back to Mecca, and we cannot expect any more peace treaties with these people. They don't have a system of trustworthiness or a concept of integrity. They will make excuses for whatever and do whatever. So then the Prophet ﷺ called all of these men from Arabia, and they got an army of 10,000 men, and they came up to Mecca. And by the time they came to the outskirts, now some of the people in Mecca are just like seeing this huge encampment. And then in that night, they lit up all these spread out fires. So the thing just looks massive, and the people of Mecca are scared. So Abu Sufyan, he comes out, and he's going to try to find out, what is this and how do we make peace with this? So Abu Sufyan was respectably received, and the Prophet ﷺ, he respected his uncle Abbas, who was saying, let's hear him out and let's, understand him and come to an understanding before we move forward. By the morning time, the Prophet ﷺ simply just came to him and said, Abu Sufyan, what is holding you back from converting? Why don't you just be a Muslim? What is this thing?
Was it in that time that Umar radiallahu anhu was like, we should just kill him right here?
Yeah. That's at the beginning. He's like, what is this? Why is this guy coming? Why are we treating him special? So the Prophet ﷺ was known for this, by the way. When he sent letters to the Romans, it's a very good point you brought up. He said, ila azim al-Rum, to the great ruler of Rome. Now this is a disbeliever who is not known for some great just empire, but he is respected amongst his people as the ruler, and so the Prophet ﷺ is treating people with respect that are known with respect. So I've had, some Muslims say strange things, like when you say the great Martin Luther King Jr., they're like, oh, he was a disbeliever and died as a disbeliever. Why are you calling him great? What he stood for was great. Now his beliefs and that is between him and God, and he will on the day of judgment, be, judged for his own situation. But in terms of who he was and what he represented, for sure it was great. And so the Prophet ﷺ honored Abu Sufyan, and then finally Abu Sufyan he thought about it and he has no answer. Like in his mind he's thinking and so he reconciled. We used to say he's like crazy madman or something, what happened, and he's just thinking, every step of the way the Muslims are growing. Everybody deeply adores the Prophet ﷺ. Everybody who gets to know him closely. So he converted. And the Prophet ﷺ empowered him to go back and communicate that, we're not here for revenge. We're not here for fighting. We're not here for bloodshed. We're here to bring Mecca back to its Abrahamic roots. We just want to remove the idols, bring a just system, and you can look into it and see if it fits you or not. So Abu Sufyan came, and when the Prophet ﷺ came, he announced, outside of some skirmishes on the other side of Mecca, where Khalid ibn Walid was, the Prophet ﷺ sent, I think, 3 or 4 groups to come from all sides, so that there would be no plan for scrambling an army against the Muslims in some way coming from somewhere. And there was some small skirmishes, but not like any sort of battles or anything like that. And there was a list of some people who had done major crimes. It was like in the teens, the Prophet had read a list of people that these, will be put to death if we find them. Some of those
weren't
escaped.
Some of the people that were in the skirmishes against the groups that were trying to take Mecca, didn't some of them later convert to Islam, like Ikrimah ibn Abu Jahl, I think? And
yeah, exactly. A handful of them, they sought asylum, and because the Quran حتى يسمع كلام الله. وإن أحد استجارك فأجره حتى يسمع كلام الله. Or I may have butchered the ayah, but if some of the أحد من المشركين استجارك فأجره حتى يسمع كلام الله. So if one of the polytheists come to you saying, you know what, I just want to learn about this message and I'm seeking your asylum for that, then he's allowed to, right? So basically now the Prophet ﷺ and his companions come in, and it was one of the companions said, I think it was Sa'ad ibn Ubadah, that, this is going to be Yawm Malhama. This will be a day we will get our revenge. And the Prophet said, no, this is the day of mercy. And so they went and, there was the destruction of the idols. And of course, as most you can imagine, these polytheists who've been raised for generations worshipping these statues, believing they have holy powers.
And also as the center of their societal structure as well. So.
Exactly. So everybody's there. What is he going to do? And so one idol destroyed, another idol destroyed. No lightning bolts or earthquakes. Nothing's happening, right? So, kind of like the Abraham story, peace and blessings be upon him. They can't defend themselves. They're just being destroyed, and there's no consequence. So if they were powerful, this would be the time to show their power, right? And they're watching that one after another, 300 and some idols destroyed.
I feel like the breaking of the idols was not just a physical thing, but also symbolic in that was the end of polytheism in Mecca.
Yep, that's exactly what it was. Now, the Abrahamic prayer, as we see in Surah Al-Imran, as well as the prophecy, is coming true. Even this was the prophecy the Jews were waiting for when they came to Yathrib. So now, the Muslims find themselves, So then the Prophet ﷺ, probably the most unique part of all of this, if I was going to say anything, is this concept of fortitude and perseverance, because when the Prophet started his mission, it was when he came to the Mount Safa and he announced to his extended family, I have been sent as a messenger to warn you of an accountability. After you die, you'll be resurrected and judged. And so, of course, his uncle mocked him and cursed him, and everybody was like, what are you, crazy? And then they left. So now after this, the Prophet ﷺ told everybody, I will be coming every day to spend time at Mount Safa. If you would like to ask about Islam or you'd like to announce your faith, join us at Mount Safa. And so for a week, dozens and dozens and dozens of people come to Mount Safa to embrace Islam. And that became like a message that reverberated, and that's what kind of led to the next events.
That also kind of makes me think, like, that whole mercy part about the prophetic example of leadership. Like, you can see how the character of Umar radiallahu anh, how he, like, progresses, like, how he's, at first, he seems more, like, kind of fiery or, like, impulsive, and then later on, when he becomes the caliph, then he's more collected, and, yeah. So we went further into the conquest of Makkah. So what lessons can we draw both from the breaking of the Treaty of Hudaibiyah and the aftermath and the conquest of Makkah?
When you are strategizing about a plan that you're doing, regardless of what it is, your own family, your business, your education, as a community, you might have to compromise some of your hopes and dreams immediately because of an expectation of what can be done in the long term, and that you will put in the work that in the long term what you're hoping for will come. So, like, I'll give you a good example in terms of politics. In terms of politics, Muslims have been for some time, their engagement of government is all about either free Kashmir or free Palestine. We're demanding this. We aren't really well established as a recognized native contributing faith community, and we're begging for them to change their foreign policies and to do things in other countries. And that's only emphasizing that we don't see ourselves as from here, right? So to be able to have to say, you know what, we're going to have to sacrifice a priority of Kashmir and Palestine for now, because of the priority of establishing ourselves as a recognized, respectable, contributing entity who builds relationships with our local politicians and national politicians on those issues that matter to our neighbors here. And then once we establish that and we have garnished a level of connectivity and understanding with everyone here, then after people see how we fought for their best interests and what we represent comes to bring about morality here, then when we go asking about what happened in Palestine or elsewhere, we will carry a whole lot more weight.
But don't you feel like we should hold domestic policies and then also, like, try to hold the government accountable for double standards when it comes to violation of human rights as well?
For sure. You don't not say anything, but you don't say this is our agenda, which has been the case. Like, I had a long conversation with Representative Keith Ellison about 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And that was his point. You know, he said, I've traveled the country, I've done fundraisers, I've met many leaders. We're starting to see some traction, but for far and wide, your average mosque and Muslim community and their intra-mosque connection of cities, it's not really engaged with some sort of contribution to society. It's not known for that. And when Muslims are talking about politics, they don't talk about here's how we should be in terms of healthcare. Here's how we should be in terms of economy. Here's how we should be in terms of education. We're always, look what you've done in Israel and Palestine and all that.
In fact, you see some Muslims who are concerned with domestic policies are doing it kind of like selfishly. Like, for example, like, you've seen some Muslims, I'm sure, that are like, they don't vote for the Democratic candidate because they're also afraid of this haunting socialism, and, the free healthcare thing is all scary because then you make less money.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that you have to, unfortunately, it's a corrupt system. Like, we live in a corrupt political system that has two parties that are tokenizing certain values in the society, that it feels like we can just pretty much, for the most part, split people, divide and conquer, classic control mechanism, and they just keep them at each other. So you're not going to get from either one of them. So there is no viable third party. You're not going to influence politics at all as a third party right now as it is. And so you're going to have to find one, going back to the Hudaibiyah, you're not going to get a perfect, gift-wrapped Islamic purity. And that's what the Prophet was agreeing in Hudaibiyah. So, but he worked, and they were working hard. They were visiting this village and that, inviting these people and those people, and having long discussions. And so many people were converting to Islam over this period. And so we see in the Fath of Mecca, same thing. The Prophet very well could have said, hundreds of people have been fighting and attacking and plotting against us for some 20 years now, okay? And so now we will bring you all to justice. And looking at how even modern American policies, what we did to Afghanistan when supposedly a handful of people in the caves orchestrated 9/11, and we just obliterated what we did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? So most people would not say, oh, Muhammad is such an evil man, considering what he had been through for 20 years, right? But still, he said, look, let me give you one more chance just to see what I'm brought with. As the Quran says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We've sent you, Muhammad, as an act of compassion and benevolence and caring kindness to the whole world. And so he's going to come there, show them that it's in your best interest to rise above the idea that this statue that somebody has built here is some sort of divine. You are better than that as a human being. So the idea that modern people in the whole, I've had conversations with Hindus that they get bothered by all of this. I've had some Hindu people tell me, Imam, your religion is against, my values and beliefs and hatefully so. You want to destroy idol worship. And I said, but it's not me and my religion didn't do that. God is God, and I'm not going to harm you, but I would hope that the world would stop believing that you can worship a statue, because this makes absolutely no sense. And I respect you as a person and your right to do that, but it's completely irrational. And so that's where, what happened in Mecca showed everybody, as you said, these idols have no powers. This is the time for them to exert their powers, right? And they clearly don't have powers. And so that's what was, whenever they used to, the Prophet ﷺ recited the verse from Surah Al-Isra, قُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. So say the truth has come and falsehood is destroyed. By its nature, falsehood is destroyed. So that was a special reality that it was supposed to come. We're promised things in the Quran in this life and the hereafter, but we have to work for it. وَالنِّعْمَ أَجْرُ الْعَامِلِينَ, it says, how great is the reward for those who worked for it. So a lot of Muslims complain, we don't get this, we don't get that, Palestine this, America, Islamophobia. How hard are we working to truly represent and be honored in Islam? You see? Do we deserve divine rapport or support? We are shown now as a weak people by obvious fact of reality. And if indeed we were doing right, it would not be that way. So we have to buckle down and work.
Yeah,
to get
instead
that
of
Mecca.
Instead of only focusing on foreign policy, focus on domestic policy and stuff. Because I've had some friends be like obviously in a joke, but they were like, I forget the context, but they were like, yeah, you can just blame Islamophobia kind of thing. Because that's a lot of people do that. They just for some situations where it wouldn't even fit, they're like, yeah, it's Islamophobia. We need to just work with what we have and get better.
Exactly. Islamophobia is the result of us not becoming known to our neighbors. And who's going to make us be known to our neighbors? We're going to expect them to do it? That's our job.
Right. So after this comes the Battle of Hunayn, the last stand for polytheism in Arabia. So what happened and what was the impact?
So in Ta'if, you have these two giant tribes, Hawazin and Thaqif. And they're both watching what's happening in Mecca. They're both hearing of the destruction of all these idols. And they are concerned really about two things. The first concern is the legacy of our ancestors, our values, our beliefs, our idols, our gods. And the second is, the Quraish have failed in their leadership of Mecca and in their ownership of the polytheistic, lead, as it were, in Arabia. So let's go fight these people and maybe we'll become the new honored tribe of Arabia. So they put together 20,000 some odd people, women, children, they came. The point of bringing the women and the children like in large numbers was they are going to be there as a back layer that says you cannot escape. You will fight till the death, right? So they came in and they brought that. The Muslims heard of it. And here's the interesting thing. This is profound. As a result of the way the Prophet ﷺ engaged the conquest of Mecca, or really the natural return of Mecca to its Abrahamic roots, he told the Muslims and the Quraish at large, they're coming to us, and you know what they want. And the Quraysh are very aware that now they've lost the power, and that who would probably be better? Those that are still polytheists. We see how this Muhammad is, how he's treating us, and we've heard it over the time that everyone who knows him and just and honest and integrity and compassion and all that. What would happen if Thaqif and Hawazin took over here?
Now
right?
you're the now you're the underdogs. Now you're the.
So they joined. There were probably hundreds of polytheists. Some of the main leaders were known to be joining in this battle with the Muslims against Hawazin and Thaqif. So they went out there. The Muslims got the ayah in Surah Tawbah. It says, وَيَوْمَ حُنَيْنٍ إِذْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ كَثْرَتُكُمْ وَلَمْ تُغْنِ عَنْكُمْ شَيْئًا. So the ayah says, Hunain, you found yourself slipping up as believers because you saw that we have still 10,000 army. They still have that same giant army, and now they've added to it hundreds of Quraysh polytheists. So they feel like, yeah, nobody can mess with us, right? So they're marching just in pride, but they don't know that Hawazin and Thaqif have picked up their move, and they're now on some mountains. They call them the Akhshabain. Outside is where Hunain is. And as the army's coming through, they just came up on the sides, which is classic military. If you were really thinking like careful, you would know. If I'm going through a ravine, we should at least have people looking up, And so the arrows came, and some of the narrations have like hundreds of killed and injured people in the Muslim army within moments of that battle. So it was a big disaster, and many people retreated. Some of the narrations said hundreds of people left at that moment, most of them Muslim. But many of the polytheists stayed firm. And the Prophet ﷺ even said when he went in, Ana ibn Abdul Muttalib, right? I am the son or the grandson of Abdul Muttalib. He said, Ana Nabi la shak. I am the messenger of God. There's no doubt about that. I am also the son or the grandson of Abdul Muttalib. So he's calling out to his cultural connection to his tribe, and he's calling out to his fellow believers, and he's letting that both be acceptable in this battle. So it was pretty ferocious, and there was some changing of morale, but the Muslims came out on top, and they basically followed them all the way to Ta'if, pushing them back, and they tried to lay siege to it. After days, they realized, this is not going anywhere. They're not going to fight us. We're not going to destroy the village or whatever. So they just left, right? So now that basically created a scenario where, and this is where the Surah At-Tawbah verses start to come down heavy at this point, because Surah At-Tawbah is really this. So there's 114 chapters of the Quran. 113 begin in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, right? Or however you want to translate those. But this kindness, caring, loving, that's the essence of God. That's the essence of prophethood. That's the purpose of life, for people to choose selfless concern for others over themselves, right? So now one verse comes with no Bismillah at the beginning. And it basically says, from here on out, there are no more treaties with polytheists. There will be no more living side by side with the polytheists here in Arabia. And the Prophet even made a statement, very famous, أخرج المشركين من جزيرة العرب. Remove the polytheists from there. So they won that battle, and then Hawazin and Thaqif, they basically settled up in the stronghold of Ta'if, and they stayed there. And that's a stronghold. There's still 10,000 some odd people living there, and in around the areas, there's some more Bedouin type people related to those tribes. So at this point, after that battle, Safwan ibn Umayyah is one of the main leaders of Quraysh that's still there. And he's, very, he was part of the attempt to assassinate the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when I can't remember his name. One polytheist, he resolved, I have my family and my debts and responsibilities, so...
Starts with a U. I forgot to.
Yeah, Umair ibn Wahb. So, that was, he was going to take care of Umair's family. But then Umair converted to Islam over there. Before he could come back, he didn't kill the Prophet, he actually converted. And so Safwan, the Prophet ﷺ comes up behind him, he says, look, Safwan, you see all of those 100 goats right there? He's like, yeah. He's like, those are yours. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, these are spoils of war. You joined us and you stayed through the thick of it. This is your spoils of war. Some of the Muslims, of course, are upset about this. They're like, why is he getting spoils of war and he's not a Muslim, right? But this is what we call mu'allafa qulubuhum. There's people that are on the fence. If we go out of our way and put our resources towards their benefit, showing them kindness and generosity, that might bring them closer to Islam. We're not bribing them to become Muslim. We're showing them a very strong level of generosity because God calls us to that. And hopefully they will see in that we're not us and them at the end of the day. We want everybody to be us, right? And so Safwan, of course, shortly thereafter converted to Islam, and so many others. And so there were some people who took issue with the Prophet ﷺ giving to the Quraish. Some of the new converts, like Abu Sufyan, got very good spoil, but he's a wealthy man. So there are people, some of the more poor people that were from Medina particularly, were like, what is this, right? Even there's a famous hadith in which he says, you have to be fair. And then the Prophet got very upset. He said, if I'm not fair, who would be fair, right? Like, why are you challenging me on this? And so they started to forget that we are a spiritual people. We are a people who are committed to this truth of Islam. And so we see with this Medina crowd, they're thinking, maybe he's going to stay in Mecca. Maybe he's done with us, right? And so they ask him, are you going to stay here? And the Prophet made a beautiful speech. He said, no, you've got the wrong assumption. I was brought in. I've been taken in. My home is in Medina. That's where my family is. I'm coming back with you. And that was enough. Nobody had any problems with who got what at the end of that battle. After that, for them, that is the most priceless thing in the world. So they returned back to that's all it took for them. And perhaps the Prophet ﷺ knew that. We're not in this world for possessions. We're in this world to closeness to God. And the one who is closest to God, the more I'm close to him, the more closer I am to God, right? So that's, what took place there.
Right, and then the modern lessons we can take away from it.
Hunain, number one, this idea about power and strength and being proud of that, right now, America, as our country here, it's positioning itself in like 80 some countries with military bases and all of this. But here we are falling apart inside. There's so many things falling apart in this country in terms of people's economic mobility. With this disease, 500,000 people have died from COVID because of certain serious shortcomings we have as a society. We can't blame it on Trump. We can't blame it on Republicans. There's a whole discussion to be had. And so if you're so proud of your weapons and your power and you start to put 50% of your national budget of taxes and everything into that, and you don't worry about your proper morale and the proper foundations that is what is important, then you can be defeated. You can face serious adversity.
Like we can see infrastructure problems today, like what's happening in Texas.
Yeah, exactly. And so this pride of greatness and wealth and power, and that's not where pride is. Inna al-izzata lillahi jami'a. All of the greatness and pride is God's, and that is where we should go for it. So in the modern world, we shouldn't be like, let's build the most giant Islamic center with chandeliers and minarets and domes and all of that. No, let's build something that has resources that can employ believers to do the good work. And if it looks nice, it looks nice. But let's not look to be all extravagant. Let's not look and say, okay, Like, so for example, many Muslims are like, okay, we're going to do a big unified Eid and we're going to have like 10,000 people there. But at the end of the day, did those people gain more out of their Eid than had they have done a smaller, more focused, and then some community connection and, lunching and things like that afterwards, where they're really gaining a connection with each other? Or is it very superficial and like, see, look, we're so great in number, like it's been said, oh, well, when the politicians or the news media hear about that, oh, there's so many Muslims. It doesn't matter if you're many, if you inconsequential, right? So I think that's one of the big lessons. Hunain is that was basically for the people of that time. You saw that there was this sense of, okay, is this gonna complete? Is this message? And the Prophet ﷺ, from day one, it's gonna happen. This is what we're here to do. And many people were struggling in their patience and their hope, time and time. Keep having your hope. Keep having your dream. Work towards it, and the divine support will come.
Right, and you did mention some of the verses from Surah Tawbah, and I believe those are the ones that are taken out of context the most, right?
Yes, so the word jihad as a meaning of fighting a battle against somebody comes up dozens of times in Surah Tawbah. Elsewhere in the Quran, jihad can mean many different things, speaking truth to power, struggling against yourself, seeking knowledge and being able to decipher between sound knowledge and misinformation and so forth. So, but here, it was giving the Muslims a tool as a state that there will be hypocrites who utilize a place of faith to cause discord and corruption among you. And every society has seen those in history. And there are always going to be people who hate you and are trying to attack you. So have your military force, protect yourselves, be on guard, prepare your military, and if they come, let them know that for us, we're going to either end up in heaven as a martyr, or we're going to win this battle. We're not here to, pull back and retreat. Muslims have always been known to very rarely retreat unless it was obvious that they have lost. And then when they came back, the point was, well, now we look weak, so we need to amass everybody back together and go hit it again. And that thought process is very self-preserving. I mean, right now, America's been doing this for 60 years, and most Americans don't clearly see a problem because all their taxes are being given to all of this, right? Very few people are so anti-war here, even though we've been involved in wars and destabilizing countries now for decades.
One might call it neo-imperialism.
It is imperialism. We're an empire. And it's about a capitalist world economy that supports the dollar as the supreme reality. And that is not a moral good thing for most people, right? That causes death and destruction and corruption in so many different places on the earth. But because they packaged it in a sweet way and because we like to tell ourselves stories. So Muslims are not hiding the fact that, yes, we are going to have our religion. We are going to communicate that religion to others. And if we have to fight to preserve our right to exist and to open the doors for others to have the opportunity to know about Islam and choose it, we will. But it never meant and was never taught in any ayah, not in Surah Tawbah or anywhere, that we're killing non-Muslims because they're non-Muslim, or we're fighting non-Muslims on account of them being non-Muslim. No, we're fighting tyranny, oppression, and threats from neighboring places. And we're opening the door for people to see the justice of Islam and to see the truth of its creed. And if you are an empire that is against us, and it's not like you can just go in that world and be like, okay, we're coming here in secularism and democracy and freedom of religion, and we're just going to teach our religion and we're peaceful. And then they'll be like, cool with that. Like that's a very modern thing. So it's people keep trying to cast onto history. And what's interesting, if you study the directive of the church and the connection between the church and the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire and even the British Empire, you see a very forceful, subjugating. It was a clear directive from the authority that was both religious and imperial. Whereas the directive from the scripture and the religion always was humanitarian, just, willing to self-account and call Muslims and Muslim leaders to account. Now, does that mean all Muslim leaders followed that policy? No. There are some Muslim leaders who were brutal and who were forceful about their, glory and their empire, which had to do with their religion. But delineating or distinguishing between those two is very important.
Right, inshallah. So I guess that would wrap it up for today's episode then.
Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, and assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum salam.